For a lot of obvious reasons, queer films often struggle to make it into the mainstream, but that doesn't mean that there isn't a whole bank of incredible films out there that you are missing out by not watching. The fact that we all have our own individual experiences of gender and sexuality means that it is sort of by nature impossible to ever give you a list of the absolute determined 10 best queer moments in cinema history. It is all up to personal opinion, etc., which is why I scoured the internet and collected lots of everyone's favourite moments. Hey, and if yours isn't on here, then drop it in the comments below. I'd love to hear about it. And one more thing before we start the video, if you're here to make a comment about woke culture and oh, everything's ruined, oh, I hate it, but just don't watch the video. I don't know what to tell you. Go outside, pet a dog, find happiness elsewhere, because I'm going to be right here having a great time, okay? So, I'm Amy from What Culture, and here are the 9 most powerful LGBT+ movie scenes ever. 9. Pride, when Cliff comes out. It's an incredibly understated and simple moment when Cliff makes the life-altering decision to finally come out for what we understand as being the first time. Sitting aside his friend and fellow strike supporter Hefina, Cliff prepares sandwiches in silence as if nothing is out of the ordinary. After being corrected on his cutting style, he pauses for a moment before saying, quietly and very measured, "I'm gay," before continuing to cut his bread diagonally with his eyes fixed downwards. The shot is still, just staring at the two friends as the woman then proceeds. She takes a moment to think, her face barely betraying her feelings, before a warmth takes over her voice and she looks to him to simply say, "I know." The scene that follows is so full of just respect and empathy that it doesn't need anything bombastic or stand out to make it memorable and important. Cliff's shocked face, Hefina's slight reassuring smile pulling at the corners of her mouth. It's a special moment between two friends in which Cliff is for the first time able to feel completely safe in his true identity. Thanks to the coming together of these two wildly different communities, the minors and those fighting for LGBT rights, this man is finally given the freedom and self-confidence to express his true self, which is really, really beautiful. And even though it's a very simple, quite short scene, that doesn't mean that it's not caused many a viewer to shed a tear. 8. Love, Simon, the Ferris wheel. Rom-coms definitely get dunked on a lot for being stupid and worthless in terms of cinematic value, and the thing is that there are so many rom-coms out there that they kind of almost do lose their value. However, one invaluable thing that seemingly never appears is the representation of any non-straight relationships. What has no value to one person can be of infinite value to another, and that was proven when Love, Simon came out in 2018 and troves of LGBT youth found huge comfort in its nice, comforting story. It's so rare for young queer people to get to see a happy story with them at the centre, and so a cheesy, cutesy, light-hearted rom-com telling a queer story really is a diamond in a sea of plastic. The movie follows 17-year-old Simon as he struggles with whether he wants to come out to his friends and family or not. When we finally meet the boy he's been speaking to and the two kiss unashamedly atop a Ferris wheel with their supportive friends celebrating below, it really is a lovely moment. Queer stories don't always have to be sad and full of trials and tribulations. Sometimes it's just as powerful to have something truly happy and joyful, and to see queer people experience joy on screen in front of you to remind you that actually you can do that too. It's not all doom and gloom, things are getting better. Genuinely, I think that's just as good sometimes. 7. Prayers for Bobby, Mary's speech. Religious trauma is something that's experienced by a lot of LGBTQ+ people, especially those that grow up in heavily religious households. Lots of people who grow up with their parents being heavily involved in religion spend a lot of their time in their youth sort of having it drilled into them that they are, as a person, disgusting or wrong, or that they're gonna burn in hell, rot for eternity because of their inherent sin that is being gay. Prayers for Bobby centres this religious hatred in a family's life as they struggle to come to terms with the son's coming out. Unfortunately, the mother, Mary, played by Sigourney Weaver, doesn't manage to overcome her own bigotry for the good of her son. In fact, the last words shared between the two are her spewing vitriolic hatred at him in a bitter argument, and he then goes on to end his life with the two never reconciling. In the wake of this loss, Mary reevaluates her understanding of the scripture and the origins of her biases. She gives a speech in a local council meeting supporting a pride event in which she details her own failings as a parent and all the damage her homophobic hatred did. Perhaps the most impactful part of the speech scene comes as Mary insists that you have to be careful with the bigotry you share because a child is listening somewhere, and as she's seen happen through her own life, that child can be irreversibly damaged by the hatred that they hear. 6. Brokeback Mountain. You been to Mexico? Largely due to its overtly LGBT themes, this was coined by some as one of the most influential movies in the entire year of its release, and a lot of people thought they got really snubbed at the Oscars that season. Though these days we would likely think twice before casting 2 straight Hollywood actors as main roles, instead of maybe trying to fill them with members of the queer community. Undeniably, Jake Gyllenhaal and the late Heath Ledger were fantastic in these roles. A scene that originates one of the film's best-known quotes shows the two men arguing over the life that they could have had versus the lives they've led. Stood against the backdrop of a beautiful blue lake and the dramatic mountain range, Ennis fights the jealousy he brews at the thought of Jack being with another man, all whilst knowing that they could never be exclusive under Ennis's own allowances. They could have had a life together, Jack offers, and they could have been happy, but we as an audience know that the world was not kind and that their situation doomed them to an unhappy ending. Crying, embraced by Jack, Ennis crumbles to the ground. It's all regret and sorrow, crushed dreams and lost time they can't get back. I wish I knew how to quit you, Jack laments, and oof, that one's right to the heart. 5. Pariah. Alike's poem. The film sees Alike try to come to terms with her own lesbian identity in the face of adversity and pushback from her religious mother. Navigating her relationships with 2 queer women in her peer group and trying to find her own voice in the community, Alike is up against a lot. By the end of the film, unfortunately, her mother still refuses to be on her side, failing to reconcile her religious and personal ideas of what her daughter should be with the true identity of the girl. Alike thus makes the decision to leave home and go to college early, but she makes it clear that she's not running from problems, she's choosing to grow. Reading from her well-worn notebook, she describes how her family heartbreak and her heartbreak over her first queer relationship, or almost relationship, has cracked her heart open and thus allowed her to grow. She's not broken, she explains, she's free. 4. Tomboy, the football game. Tomboy sees a child coming to terms with their gender identity. Born as a little girl, they take on a new male moniker and persona when moving to a new town. The little girl becomes Mikkel and they're happier for it. Many of the small moments of the film come together to create its powerful message, but one of the scenes spoken about for its minimalist authenticity is the football scene. Mikkel, stepping out of the bounds and the fear that came with being in the female body, engages in a game of football with the neighborhood boys. They play unabashedly, assimilating effortlessly into the boys' game. The female form is so atrociously sexualized right from the offset regardless of age. I mentioned this because of Celine Sciamma's ability to direct the upcoming scene I'm about to talk about without actually ever sexualizing Mikkel, which you would think is the absolute lowest bar, seeing as that's actually literally a child, but also have you seen other movies? Lots of people miss that bar still. Whilst playing with the boys, a lot of them have their tops off because it's hot, it's summer, they're playing sport. Why not? You know, keep cool, stay safe. So when Mikkel makes the decision to remove their top as well, this is kind of a revolutionary moment. They remove their top just like the rest of the boys, and Sciamma's completely mundane, unpretentious portrayal of the action is refreshing and freeing. By moving into Mikkel's persona, the female body is desexualized again, and they're able to just be a child playing with other neighborhood children, having a game of football. No drama, no perverted gaze. Mikkel's skin and body is shown through this lens finally as something not worth staring at. They're granted the same freedom to engage in play as the boys are. As with the whole film and its commentary on the fluidity of gender, this moment is incredibly understated but incredibly powerful. 3. Paris is Burning, Venus's Death. Paris is Burning is pretty widely documented as one of the most important films in queer cinema history, as it follows the lives of those engaged in ball culture in 1980s New York City. The 80s was when ball culture was at its peak, and Paris is Burning explores through this unique subculture the influences of race, class, gender and sexuality on the lives of those at its centre. There are plenty of iconic and memorable moments throughout, but some argue that the single most powerful scene is the one in which we learn that Venus, a woman who we've met through the film, has been murdered. With the whole moral panic being stoked at the moment about transgender people, a lot of people are under the impression that transness is something that was just sort of came up with in the last 5 years or so, when in reality, trans people have been around for pretty much as long as the concept of gender has existed. This documentary was made back in the 80s, and yet this scene could still very much happen today. Trans people have, and currently do, still face astonishing levels of violence, especially trans women. Suddenly watching this, we're brought face to face with the reality of the violence and how it tears through communities. The loss of Venus hits right in the heart, knowing that such a vibrant young woman lost her life in that awful way. Even worse, we know that her story isn't unique in how it ends and that the violence continues. 2. Moonlight. Chiron and Kevin reunite. There is some pretty tough contention for the top spot of the most powerful moment in Moonlight, with one teaching Chiron to swim being a very close second. In a way, it sort of links to the scene we're about to talk about, because the tenderness and kindness with which he's handled is something so rare in his life, and it's something that he searches for from that moment on. Throughout his life, Chiron buries himself in order to perform the role that society wants him to. After his mother blames his bullying on his walk as a kid, with the implications being obvious, he molds himself into the shape of the masculine archetype. After one's death, Chiron lacks a strong and compassionate father figure to encourage him to be exactly who he wants to be. Juan unapologetically told Chiron as a child that there was nothing wrong with being gay, although society was determined to convince him otherwise. When Chiron finally ends up in Kevin's apartment towards the end of the film, with both of them discussing their respective lives and vulnerabilities, Chiron is able to feel safe in being tender for the first time since he was a child. The relief he feels is visible and really, really beautiful. And number 1, A Portrait of a Lady on Fire, The Crescendo. 2019's A Portrait of a Lady on Fire started making waves the moment that first lot of critics got their hands on it. And from the very beginning to the bittersweet end, you can see why. Depicting a developing relationship between a portrait artist and her subject, a woman destined to be married off for the family's social betterment against her will, the film slowly unfurls their love and finishes with a searing crescendo. Now, this crescendo isn't just figurative either, because the film literally ends with a concert. Earlier in the film, the women discuss the experience of live music, and the painter Marianne played lover Heloise a small portion of Vivaldi's Summer on the harpsichord. When the finale arrives and we see a long, unbroken shot of Heloise experiencing just about all 5 stages of grief whilst being engulfed by the music, the energy is tangible. The unflinching shots, stunning performances, and appeal to the audience's own empathies and understandings of lost love make this scene unforgettable. Heloise mourns the fact that her love isn't allowed, and all that she has lost and will continue to lose through this. And at the same time, she remembers with heartbreaking intensity the power of the bond she formed with Marianne, and the fact that the two of them will never be together. And actually, with that, we've reached the end of this list of the 10 most powerful LGBT+ movie scenes ever. There's so many amazing films, so many amazing moments, so if there's another one you would put on this list, then please let me know in the comments down below. Let's hear about it. And I've been Amy from What Culture. I'll catch you next time. Happy Pride Month, guys. Happy Pride Month.